Hello again. So I just want to present quickly Developing Readers Chapter 6. I think a lot of this is stuff that you already know, but perhaps wouldn't be able to explain to a student if they asked. My, what do I want to say here? What I have experienced with most teachers is that I feel most teachers were pretty good students. And so a lot of the times when they have to try and break things down for the students who are in their class, they struggle with it because they never had to have things broken down for them. A lot of the times when we talk about helping students, we'll talk about basic study skills. These kids need to be taught study skills. But if you asked most teachers, well, what are study skills? They probably would struggle to break it down other than, oh, well, it's good note taking or looking over your notes. There's a lot more to study skills than that. And I think this chapter does a pretty good idea, a pretty good suggestion of how to break down those study skills and help students work on understanding complex text. So if you've got the PowerPoint up, it's there. I'm moving on to slide 2. And it goes right into ways to help students understand the text. And the first one is text marking. It's that highlighting, underlining, marginal annotating. It might be using sticky notes, but helping students figure out what is important to mark or what do you really want them to remember. And this takes a lot of modeling because if you don't model how students can find what's important in a text and you give them highlighters or you let them underline things in a particular text or an article that you've printed out for them, they're going to go crazy just marking everything up. And I've witnessed this myself in my 8th grade classroom. Students have a hard time determining what should or shouldn't be marked. So you would really want to go through and do this with them a few times prior to having them do it on their own. Okay. My dog is going crazy upstairs because he wants out, but I'm going to try and get through this before I let him out. Next slide is note taking. This is different from marking up a text because this is something they might do on a text that they can't mark up, such as a textbook. It's meant to focus on material that you want to be viewed at a later time. So this might be note taking on the text. It might be note taking on a class lecture that you are giving. And there are lots of different ways to do this. They can use modeling, especially if it's an online text of what you want them to underline or take notes on. But even if they're taking notes in class, you don't necessarily want them writing down word for word everything that you have on the board or everything in the presentation or everything that you're saying. So teaching students how to paraphrase what is being said or presented in a way that they can put it in their notes so that they understand. So I typically will do this with students and I will go through a couple minutes worth of information where they're not allowed to have their pens or pencils in their hand. And then I'll pause for 2 or 3 minutes where they can write down what they think most of what I had just said or what we went over was really talking about. And then we'll discuss with each other or with partners or as a whole class what they marked down, what some of them missed or didn't mark, and come together as a class consensus of what were those really important ideas and what was just said. So this is a really good way to model note taking. And then later, they don't need nearly as much instruction because they figured out how to identify what is important in what I've said or in particular passages. Um, the next slide is this elaborating, how to get students to elaborate on a text. And it is that whole taxonomy that we went over in chapter 5. It's simply that, getting them to ask the different questions. What should I remember? What do I need to understand? And so on. So for this particular thing, if you just went back to what we talked about in chapter 5, you've got it. Text coding. I thought this was really interesting. I think people do this naturally without calling it text coding. It's letting students use an established code to mark the text. I think if you think about your English classes and proofreading someone else's work, that you might have had a symbol that meant, oh, you need a new paragraph here, or there should be a comma here, or you need to indent here. And if you remember those different codes that you used in proofreading papers, it's that same concept. only it helps them identify things that are important in a passage. So, for example, they might use a star to indicate that this is a really important concept I should remember, or they might use a capital A to identify this is the author's opinion or perspective. Um, and ways that you can use this is have students read something through once, looking for particular codes like what is important, where are the vocabulary, um, are there theories? Have them read it again, looking for the author's perspective. And depending on your content, this can be very specific. So if I was a language arts teacher, which I am, I might have them mark things that identify mood or tone, or um, identify things for foreshadowing. Whereas if I were a history teacher, I might have them identify things that were laws or rebellions, or sided with the North, sided with the South, or reasons for um, the Stamp Act, or so on and so forth. So text coding can be very content specific. Okay, moving on. Paraphrasing, it's basically that catching the gist of what the author is saying. So it's different than retelling. Retelling is using many of the same words that the author used. Paraphrasing is taking what the author has said or what they've read and putting it into student-friendly language to help them understand. And that is, again, different than summarizing, because summarizing goes from beyond retelling, beyond paraphrasing, to also synthesizing. Like, why is this important to me? So, paraphrasing, there are a couple of different ways. Miko, sorry. A couple of different ways that you can do this. Some of the popular ones I put on the slide. So, you can have 2-column notes. One side is for paraphrasing, the other one is for elaborating or questioning. So you might put the questioning on the first column. What is the author saying about chemical reactions? And then they answer that on the second column of notes. You might have students do this with one side is a quote from the text, and the other one is a personal connection to that. So this would be really good for the Maya Angelou poems that someone's doing in class. Oh, Lauren, maybe, is that you? I think so. Anyhow, having them put something from the text, and on the other side, how is this an example of racism and what might be a personal connection to that they might have to that. Another one might be a question about the text, and the other side or the other column could be an answer in student-friendly language, and so on. So then we move on to summarizing. Sorry, my dog is making this really difficult tonight. My computer has frozen. There we go, summarizing. So lots of times it's difficult because it requires students both being able to identify what is important and to synthesize that new information. What does the author want the reader to take away from the text? So it's that kind of collaborative thing at the very end. Now you've read the whole thing. What does all of this mean, and why is that important to you? So a couple of different things, using those possible sentence strategies to help students, where you give them some words from the text and ask them to create a summary using those words. So you would be pulling out those words that identify the important things. So you're helping them identify what's important, but also allowing them to develop the skill of summarizing. Outlining is another way that students can comprehend a text. I am sure you've done the traditional outline with the Roman numeral 1, and you put the big heading, and then you indent and you go A, B, C, and so on. That's just one way. There are lots of different types of outlines. That one's called like the power notes, and it's traditional. There's a structured overview where you can have it kind of like a pyramid, where they organize the information from um, most important, least important, or big ideas, supporting ideas. There are lots of different outline types. You could look those all up on Google to figure out which might work best for you and your content. Okay. And then we have this thing called text frames, and you can combine this with text coding. So text frames is just putting your content into a particular frame or a box that you want students to look at it through, or a lens. So for example, looking at something through a problem solution lens. How could they read this particular text, go through, identify what the problem is, and then identify the possible solutions? And you can combine that with text coding, so giving students the ability to mark what the problem is with a P, and any solutions that they see in the text with an S. And you could do that with any of these particular things. Cause and effect works really good in the science areas. As well as the history areas, having students identify the cause of a particular thing and then the effects that that had on the people or the population. Goal and action could be really good for your um, health classes, your physical education classes, kinds of things. Compare and contrast works well in just about any content. Concept definition, again, might be really good in some of your science or vocabulary heavy content areas. Students can mark the text identifying each of the above or note take with the ideas in mind, or do double-sided notes. So one side is the comparison, one side is the contrast, one side is the cause, one side is the effect, and so on. Another way that students can begin to understand, and we've talked about this before, is that graphic representation. You've all done a really good job with your graphic organizers, so you're really good at that. But it can go beyond graphic organizers to any type of visual display of key ideas and details. So I know someone mentioned in the last assignment having students do a comic strip. That would be a really good way to have a visual display of that information. It might be a table or a chart. Graphic representation can be formulas written out in various kinds of ways. Moving on, we have the interactive reading guides, and this is what the chapter ends with. And basically, this is combining all of that other stuff, but having it be interactive so that the students are working with a partner. So both students can read the text and then have them do one of those other things, summarize, paraphrase, outline, but do it with a partner so that they have someone to talk that over with, because we know that when students are talking through whatever it is that they're trying to do with another student, that interactive piece helps make it not just rote learning, but that true committed to memory kind of thing, because now it's involved in a conversation in another person. So the assignment, and it's not an assignment necessarily for grading, but I'm going to use it as a way of basically doing attendance, is that I want a minimum of a 1-minute video. You have to record yourself. I get to see your face. Only one of you took me up on that, and I was so excited that now I'm going to require all of you, if you want attendance counted for next week. I don't care if you do this for me for Tuesday or Thursday's class, but it has to be there by Thursday at 11:59 of next week, where you give me a minimum of a 1-minute video talking to me about one of these strategies that we just covered, and which one you probably used the most as a student when you were in either elementary, middle, or high school, and which one you think would be best for the content that you hope to cover the most. I know with elementary teachers, you're going to cover lots of content, but the content that you are most drawn to, which one of these strategies do you think you would be most likely to help your students use? 1 minute talking to me about that. If you don't have that turned in by 11:59 on Thursday, I will give you 0 points for attendance next week. So I have to have it by then. So make sure that you give me a minimum of a 1-minute recording. You can submit that. I will create an assignment tab, but understand again, I'm not going to grade the assignment. The grade comes through your attendance for next week. So I will mark the assignment attendance week of, and then you could submit your videos through there. Thank you. I look forward to seeing and hearing from you. Feel free to put in the video also how you're doing. If there's anything else that I can do to be more helpful for you in this class, note that, I'm sorry, my dog and cat are chasing each other around the house. Note that we do have coming up towards the end of this class a piece where you will have to show me you teaching a particular lesson. So you might want to begin thinking about who you can teach. I don't care if it's your cat or your dog. I don't care if it's your mom, your dad, a spouse, a sibling, a younger sibling, an older sibling. I don't care. But know that that's coming up and that you want to start thinking about that, that I am going to ask you to actually teach a lesson, video it or record it, and that is one of the grades coming at the end of this class. So be thinking about that. Maybe start enlisting some of your relatives to be your class. Yeah. So I will See you all later.